ballots. We have very bad elections. We have a bad voting system. We have mail-in ballots. And, it's very interesting. I read the other day the post office is saying how bad it is. The post office is critiquing themselves, saying we're really in bad shape. We can't deliver the mail. And they're not even talking about mail-in ballots, right? Where we're going to dump millions and millions of ballots. And I'm saying to myself, how can they be taking the vote and they can't? They are saying they're in very bad shape, that they cannot deliver the mail well. And we're relying on them. And I said, we ought to go to court and we ought to bring a lawsuit, because they're going to lose hundreds of thousands of ballots, maybe purposely or maybe just through incompetence. But we have a lot of our votes come in, many, many, big percentage, whatever it may be. But a tremendous percentage, much more than half, come in with the mail-in voting. And we have the post office say they can't do the job. So wouldn't you have to make a change?
This is Democracy Watch. Mark, that was Donald Trump threatening a lawsuit to throw out mail ballots in this election. So first of all, you're in the courts constantly battling the Trump campaign, the RNC. What is the likelihood that Trump actually brings this lawsuit forward?
Okay, so let me answer that in two ways. The chance that the Trump campaign or the RNC brings a lawsuit because Donald Trump said something at a rally or an interview, very, very small. I mean, he is usually talking about, fictitious cannibals and murderers, sharks versus batteries in the ocean, windmills versus birds. I'm sure I'm missing some.
We got magnets. We got Nikki Haley in charge of the Capitol. Jeb Bush got us involved in the war in the Middle East. World War II hasn't happened yet. How much time you got?
Right, exactly. So I'm pretty sure that when he gets off stage, they're like, "Okay, pops,
time for bed, Grandpa." Time for I don't think there's a lawyer writing down the lawsuit as he's saying this nonsense. Yeah. So in that sense, I think very small. But the flip side is that for all of the rhetoric that Republicans have about how they now love voting by mail, they continue to bring a lot of lawsuits challenging voting by mail. So, it's like the stop clock that's right twice a day, which is that Donald Trump railing about mail-in voting is vintage Donald Trump. The Republican Party attacking mail-in voting is definitely part of their day-in litigation strategy for 2024. Well, to your point, the Trump campaign already has filed 2 lawsuits to toss certain mail-in ballots, both of the suits filed in the swing state of Nevada. Can you talk about what's at stake in those cases?
Yeah, and it's not just Nevada. I mean, they have filed similar lawsuits in Illinois, in Mississippi. You mentioned Nevada, they are litigating in Pennsylvania. There's no state where they don't attack voting by mail. I mean, it is not just presidential states. They are anti-voting by mail wherever they can find it. They've been filing lawsuits in New York attacking that state's vote by mail. So, we see this in a lot of places. And the reason is that they want to both try to win in court in a way that if they win in one jurisdiction, maybe it helps them someplace else, that they can create precedent from one state to the other. Right. But the second thing is they need to keep feeding their base. And their base wants to hear attacks on the voting system. And this is the paradox that the Republican Party finds itself in. I wrote a piece for Democracy.com in which I described the Republican Party as essentially Sisyphus, who was the mythological person who was condemned for all of eternity to roll a rock up a hill, only to have it roll back down and before it reached the top. And in many respects, that's the Republican Party and voting by mail. On the one hand, they are trying to say vote by mail, but then the rock rolls down the hill because Donald Trump and their lawyers continue to attack voting by mail. So they're in this place where on the one hand, their operatives want them to stop. On the other hand, their message people and their base are demanding more content in attacking voting by mail. It's really a no-win situation of their own creation.
Yeah, and you did mention that you wrote that piece in Democracy Docket. For those watching right now, if you are not yet signed up for Democracy Docket, please make sure to sign up. It's a great resource Mark founded to focus on everything voting in elections. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Mark, we know that despite what they say, that Republicans are in courts to restrict mail-in voting. Democracy Docket actually took a look at the Republicans' actual record, though, on these lawsuits. What did Democracy Docket find?
It found that they lose. They lose, right? So Democracy Docket did a comprehensive analysis, and what they found is that this cycle, they have lost 20 cases and only won 5.
Now, with that said, though, with those 5 that are won, I mean, we've spoken about the fact that really Democrats have to be perfect at winning these cases, and Republicans just have to win one, really, to roll back voting rights. So can you speak on the fact that they have won those 5? And even though we would look at that and we would say, okay, well, Democrats have won 80% of cases, or pro-democracy forces have won 80% of cases, those 20% are still have a cataclysmic impact, because that rolls back voting rights in each of the cases where they've won.
Yeah. So look, you have to look at this through the lens of what is doable and what is not doable. Some of those 5 cases had no real impact on voters. Some of those were cases that they won because we were unable to achieve the results we were hoping in rolling back a legislative restriction that Republicans have put in place. So the Republicans put in place a legislative restriction, and it was challenged, and that didn't prevail, and therefore it's given as a victory to the Republicans. So that's the reality. But I want to adopt and actually endorse your main point, which is something we all need to come to terms with, which is that after 2020, Republican legislatures met and they enacted a series of restrictive voting laws. In Texas, SB 1, in Florida, SB 90, in Georgia, SB 202, in Arkansas, in Kansas, in Iowa, like all around the country, they have passed a series of voter suppression laws. New Hampshire's governor just signed a voter suppression law in New Hampshire. So that is the reality. And I wish I could say that each of those cases we win. I wish I could say that in each of the cases the Republicans bring to challenge more progressive voting laws, they lose. Over time, we are winning a lot, but over time, we are fighting not just the Republicans' lawyers in court. We are fighting the Republican majorities in these state legislatures. Right. And it is a daunting task, because they can, with every time we win a case, they can just go back and pass a new law. Yeah. And so we need this cycle to break. We need the Republican Party to come to realize that Trumpism is a dead end electorally. And if that happens, maybe, just maybe, they will come to the realization that they need to start competing for people's vote, not competing to prevent people from being able to vote.
I want to jump back into mail-in voting for just a quick moment and ask you a question for posterity here. Doesn't the USPS prioritize election mail? Can you speak on that process?
Yeah, so the U.S. Postal Service does prioritize election mail. That is part of their rules. It is part of their regulations. It's part of their practice, and I don't want to discount that. They absolutely do. They issue guidance to counties for how to envelope and identify election-sensitive mail. The reason why you heard a little bit of a chuckle from me when you asked the question, though, is that Louis DeJoy has been the Postmaster General. He was appointed by Donald Trump, and he is still there. And there is. Yes, the work of the local post office is heroic. The mail carriers do an excellent job. There are lots of members of the Board of Governors of the U.S. Postal Service who care a lot about this issue. I've spoken to them, and they genuinely care about this issue. But Louis DeJoy, let's be clear, he was appointed to be the head of the Postal Service by Donald Trump, and he is still there. I've said that now twice, and that's on purpose, because I want everyone to let that sink in. So it is not a reason not to trust the U.S. Postal Service, because, like I said, the men and women who are staffing it are doing the best job they can with the resources they have. But there have been controversies just this year about closing sorting facilities and ending end-of-day postal service pickup. And so my message to everyone is, if you want to vote by mail, you absolutely should. But make sure you get your mail-in ballot early, and make sure you get it in quickly. Like, don't sit on it. Don't wait till the last day. Yeah. If you're in a jurisdiction that allows a drop box, use a drop box, because the drop box avoids the mail. It gets picked up by the local election officials directly. So everyone who wants to vote by mail should, but please don't dawdle in returning your mail-in ballot. Give yourself a good 10 days to 2 weeks for your mail-in ballot to get returned for election.
Yeah, I think that's perfect advice. More broadly, though, this really isn't about, these lawsuits aren't about the U.S. Postal Service. They're about finding any excuse to attack mail ballots. Democrats do have an advantage by virtue of utilizing mail ballots because it's more convenient. It gives a larger window to actually vote. But we're also at a disadvantage at the same time, because if Republicans attack those ballots, given that they know Democrats use it disproportionately, doesn't that set us up for a little bit of worry, knowing that if they are successful at attacking mail ballots, that they really won't have to worry about waging that attack on Republicans, since Democrats are the ones who employ those mail ballots?
Yeah. So look, I worry about everything. Okay. So like, I worry about mail-in voting. I worry about in-person voting. I worry about early voting. The fact is that Republicans are attacking all aspects of the voting system.
Right.
You know, if they're not attacking mail-in voting, they are attacking the polling, the siting of polling places, for example, on college campuses or near public transportation. Right? They don't want there to be polling locations that are convenient to voters. If they are not attacking mail-in voting, they are making it harder to register. They are requiring a wet ink signature. If they're not attacking registration and mail-in voting, they are attacking early voting by trying to prevent early voting sites from being open longer times on weekends. So the fact is, the Republican Party's approach to voting is to attack all aspects of voting and any aspect of voting that is relied upon by minority voters and young voters in particular. So we have talked in earlier episodes about their attack on student IDs. You know, we've talked in earlier episodes about their attacks on methods of voting that are used predominantly by poor rural communities, Native American communities, by black voters. So they're going to attack. Our job is to defend the right to vote, is to defend all methods of voting, and to promote all of them. For Democrats who want to vote in person on Election Day, they ought to do that. If they want to vote early, they ought to be able to do that, and they ought to do that. And if they want to vote by mail, they ought to do that, and they ought to have confidence that their ballot is going to count, and that we're not going to allow the Republican Party to set the agenda of voting in this country. Because if we do that, if we cede that ground, then there will frankly be no voting. Because let's not forget, Donald Trump says he wants to be a dictator on day one, but it's not just day one. Donald Trump says he hasn't read Project 2025, but he knows the parts of Project 2025 that will allow him to take over every aspect of the federal government, to use it and weaponize it against his political opponents, whether those political opponents be people like you, Brian, who speak the truth, whether it be people like me who are lawyers, whether it be against donors who support Democratic candidates, or whether it's against voters and activists who are doing nothing other than trying to make sure that every voter is eligible to vote and have their vote counted. So we can't let the other side get too far into our heads, and we can't let them win.
Well, that was perfectly put. And to that exact point, you have been an absolute leader in fighting these Republican efforts in the courts, really where this is ground zero right now. So for those watching, a small step that we can all take to support the work that Marc and his team are doing is to sign up for Democracy Docket. I'll put the link again right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.